So if you don't know, my birthday was a month ago, almost exactly, a little bit over a month, but it was a month ago, and I've started to realize that I am getting old. Do you remember? Thanks. Yeah, I didn't get any like walkers or anything. But I've started to realize this. My wife tries to say that it's because of ears growing out of my hair. All of a sudden what? Ears growing out of my hair, hairs growing out of my hair. Hey, have a great week, everybody. Oh man, I need more coffee. Whatever it is, you know, I'm getting old. Just give the old guy a break, all right? What's wrong with you people? She said I have hairs growing out of my ears. She will. Does anybody else's wife do this? She comes and will attack me with tweezers. I'll just be standing there and I'm like, no, what are you doing? And she's pulling hairs out of my ears, and I'm screaming and crying like a little baby. She died. Look at her. She's dying laughing right now. That girl, she says, I think they make me look mature, but I comb them up. But that's not how I really know I'm getting old. I also have the wrinkle thing starting to show up, and I found that the only way to get rid of wrinkles really permanently, write this down, ladies, is to gain more weight. So you just keep gaining weight and you never get wrinkles. This is what I've learned. So, but that's not how I know I'm getting old. You want to know how I'm getting old? Everybody say sure. Do we have the picture? Do you have the picture up there? Do you see this young couple? Everybody say, aww. This is Callie. This is Jenny's little sister. She's cute. She's nice. She's funny. She's going to college. She is really smart and really cares about people. She's a great girl. This is Jake. He is a cowboy. He rides bucking broncs, right? And see the belt? You can tell he does, right? He always has the big belt on. I always want to steal one and just put it on and walk around and be like, hey, what's up? But here's how I know I'm getting old, all right? This is how I know. Do you see Jake's hat up there? Do you know what I want to do every time I see Jake in this hat? I want to rip it off his head and bend it. Yeah? I mean, does anybody else have that compulsion? I see a straight, flat hat and it drives me. Have you seen the kids walking around with the flat hat and they put it off to the side and they're like, hey, what's up, man? Oh man, everything inside of me wants to grab the hat off their head, curl it around and throw it back in their face and say, that's how you wear a hat! You know what I'm saying? Does anybody else feel that? This is how I know I'm getting old, right? Because I look at things that people are doing who are young people. I can start to say that, I guess. I'm 37, I don't know. But young people do, and it drives me nuts. Several months ago, I was hanging out with my buddies and their kids. This is another one of those that makes me go, oh man, I'm getting old. I'm playing catch or something with his boys, and his one son has to go to the bathroom, and instead, do you remember when you were a kid, you're playing hide and seek, you're playing catch out in the yard? If you had to stop the game, do you remember what you said? Does anybody remember? Time out, right? Yes? Yeah? This is what he's throwing the ball, and he goes, pause! And I was like, pause? Who are you? He was like, pause. I was like, what do you mean? He said, pause, I have to go to the bathroom. And I was like, you better go to the bathroom. Well, I'll smack you up. Do you know why? Because kids nowadays play so many video games, timeout doesn't mean anything. You know what means something to them? Pause, right? Pause in the game. I get old because this stuff drives me nuts. The reality that I'm finding, maybe you've already realized this, and this is an old realization for you. Maybe it's some of you are on to this. Maybe some of you, if these things don't drive you nuts, you are not old yet, all right? Give yourself a pat on the back and feel better about it. And the teenagers are like, you are old, kid. You're 37, you're almost dead. What I found is that as I continue to grow old, my preferences at some point got set in stone. And yours? Like there's a point in life where I just kind of, this is whatever it was, how I was raised, kind of my personal taste. I remember as a kid thinking old guys that had pins in their pocket were kind of silly. I find myself all the time putting stuff in my pocket. Like and I'm like, man, old guys knew what they were doing, you know? I'm walking around with pins and wallets and everything hanging out of my pocket. I don't know what it is, but there was some point where my preferences, all the things, whether it's personal choices or whatever, they kind of got set in stone. And as I continue to move through life, I have stopped changing as much, and I've started to kind of settle into who Kent is, and it drives me nuts. I don't know why it drives me nuts, but it drives me nuts when I see things like the flat-billed hats and when kids say pause. And I think it has to do with it encroaching on my preferences and the personal ways that I think life should be lived. Have you felt that before? Yes. Right? Would we all say yes? I hope that this morning, as we're going to jump into, in just a moment, Acts chapter 10, and we're going to be looking at a Bible character who I think is about to have his preferences, have some of his kind of ideal way of living trampled on a little bit, if you would. And I'm hoping, my whole goal this morning was to drive a little bit of that up and inside of you so that you can start to think about, man, what is it like when my preferences get trampled on? Right? Because we all experience this. Some of us experience it in different ways. Some of us experience it in greater measure than others. I personally am really starting to experience this a lot in my life. I see a lot of things young people do, and I think, that's dumb. Did you know, here's one, let me give you one more. Did you know that there is a thing out there, it's a helicopter, and you wear a little bracelet, right? You wear a bracelet, and you take this helicopter, and you throw it up. You guys can get to Acts chapter 10. You throw this helicopter up, and it will follow you wherever you want to go. It's like a little remote control helicopter. It'll follow you wherever you want to go, and it will videotape and take pictures of you while you are doing stuff. Has anybody heard of this? It'll like swoop, thank you, say young people. It'll swoop around you, it'll like fly off, it'll come back, and it'll take video of you, and you can be like, hey, what's up? I'm super cool. You know what I think about this? I think it is stupid, all right? Dumb. Why do I need a helicopter documenting every moment of my life? How many of you think it's not stupid? Anybody in here? Yeah, so, you all are still young. You're welcome. I just classified it. This is the world that we live in. Everything is changing at a monumental rate. Everything is changing at a monumental rate. As a matter of fact, things are changing faster than they have ever changed in the world before. You know, for thousands of years, the world relatively was much the same, right? It was much the same as it was even in Bible times. Maybe the clothing changed a little bit, but for the most part, there wasn't electricity, there wasn't running water. People all had to go out. If you wanted to go to the bathroom, you went outside to go to the bathroom. If you wanted water, you went outside to get the water. People didn't stay indoors a lot because there wasn't air conditioning, right? This world that we live in is changing at a monumental rate. And if we don't learn how to embrace and adapt and how to kind of engage this kind of change, the world will run past us, won't it? It will run past us. This morning, we're going to look at this guy, Acts chapter 10, and we're going to see a guy who is about to encounter a pretty major change in his life. Now, before we get there, I need to tell you what's going on in the book of Acts. We are about to come into this place where the church has been born out into society. The Israelite, on the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit came down on the apostles and this group of believers that they were with. Peter gets up and preaches. You probably know the story. The church is born out. Thousands of people come to Christ. They begin to, they're just on fire. They're passionate about God. They go to the temple every day. They preach and they pray together and they eat together. The entire thing. Have you ever been a part of a movement like that where the entire thing is just kind of, you can't stop it. It's unforgettable. You go to meetings with people and you pray longer than you talk about stuff. You know? There's powerful things happening in the church. And all of a sudden, the Jewish religious leaders, they kind of gather together and they start to get the sense that if we don't do something about this, we're not going to be able to stop this movement. They bring in a guy named Stephen, and they let Stephen talk for a little bit. Stephen kind of gives a mini sermon. And when he's done, the Jewish religious leaders decide to stone him to death. You remember this story? They take big rocks and they throw them at Stephen's head until he dies. There is a persecution that breaks out against the church, meaning that non-Christians begin to try to find Christians and they try to kill them, they try to imprison them, they try to put them away. This is actually happening in our day and age. Thankfully, you and I don't have to deal with this, but you guys know this kind of activity is happening. And what the Christians did in this period of time in Jerusalem, where the church of God is born, the Christians all disperse. And they leave. And it's funny, if you look at it back from kind of a historical perspective, this moment was probably the moment that the Jewish people kind of sealed their own fate. Because instead of stopping Christianity, they spread the virus to the rest of the known world, right? Because all the Christians left, and they went out and they took the gospel with them. We are about to encounter The Apostle Peter. He has gone to a city called Joppa. It is northwest of Jerusalem along the Mediterranean Sea. It is a beautiful place. In a moment, I have a picture of it that we'll put up for you guys. But it's a beautiful place. Peter is in Joppa, and we're about to find him in Acts chapter 10. He has gone through this persecution. He has left. He is waiting and kind of trying to figure out what to happen. And this is where we find him, all right? Verse 9 of Acts chapter 10. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. Now, when you come across, if you jump into a passage like this and you find something that's a little confusing, like they were on their journey and approaching the city, you should probably look at who the they is. If you were to take some time, which I did, I went back and studied what was happening here. There is a guy named Cornelius who lives in Caesarea. It's about 30 miles north of Joppa. Beautiful city again, right? Cornelius is a Roman soldier. He's over an Italian regiment. And Cornelius is a guy he is a Gentile. Gentile meaning not a Jew. And Cornelius is a guy who has come to faith in God, the God of the Israelites. He comes to faith and he begins to become a guy who prays regularly like the Jewish people were supposed to pray. He gives to the needy. He takes care of them. I mean, he just is kind of like one of those great guys, you know, that you look up to, that you want to be like. Cornelius is praying again, and an angel comes to him. The angel speaks to Cornelius and he says, Cornelius, your prayers and your gifts to the needy have come up before the Lord. And if I could say something right here, just as kind of a side note, if you've ever felt like your prayers and what you do for God has a little bit fallen on deaf ears, I just want to tell you that Cornelius was a guy who, my guess is, has been praying for years and years and years. And the angel comes and says, your prayers and your gifts have come up before the Lord as an offering. He was heard by God. If you're somebody who is kind of in that place right now where it feels like you're not being heard from God, can I just say to you, God hears you. His timing is so much different than ours, but as just kind of a side of the sermon, I just want you to know He hears you. He is with you. And sometimes just because He's not answering right away does not mean that He's not going to answer. Cornelius, who knows how long he's been praying, who knows how long he's been giving to God. Cornelius prays, the angel says, your prayers have been heard, your gifts to the needy have been heard. Go to a guy named Simon the tanner's house. And in his house, there will be a guy named Simon Peter, and you ask Peter to come here. You bring him here. And so when we come into Acts chapter 10, verse 9, and it says that they were on their journey approaching the city, the they are the people that Cornelius has sent to get Peter to come back to him. Does this make sense to you? Peter has gone up onto the roof to pray. And let's go ahead. This is actually about 25 yards from Simon the tanner's house. It's right east of this spot is Simon the tanner's house, up on a little hill, and there's actually a lighthouse up on top of it that you can see. And this is a picture taken from there of what it would have looked like in a modern day setting of Joppa with the Mediterranean Sea, right? I don't know why Peter goes up on top of the roof to pray, probably to get away from people, whatever. But man, wouldn't you want to go and pray and just look out on that and say, God, what do you want to do? God, where do you want me to sit? Where do you want to send me? Peter is up there praying. He's looking out. It's like California beautiful. He's looking out over the ocean. And it says this in verse 10, he became hungry and wanted something to eat. It's noon, remember? Now, actually, they ate breakfast and then they ate dinner, so it's a little odd. A lot of scholars think that maybe Peter had skipped breakfast, and so now he's hungry, and so it's the middle of the day. They are preparing. It says, and while the meal was prepared, he fell into a trance. Verse 11 says this, he saw heaven opened, and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, get up, Peter, kill and eat. Verse 14, Peter says this, surely not, Lord, Peter replied, I have never eaten anything. I've never eaten anything impure or unclean. Now, this is kind of a weird scene, right? Peter is up on a roof. He's hungry, right? Any of you ever been hungry before? Man, I have been hungry before. Yeah, I know that. He's dying to eat. He's waiting. They're preparing the meal. Peter's up there praying, and he falls into a trance. And while he's praying, he sees this picnic sheet come down from heaven. It has all kinds of animals, four-footed animals, birds, reptiles on it. And God, a voice from heaven says, get up, kill and eat. And Peter says, no, Lord, no. I've never eaten anything impure or unclean. Now, to understand what's going on here, you have to understand a little something from the Old Testament, okay? So if you will, with me, I'd like to just kind of indulge myself for a moment and go to the Old Testament and read a passage from Leviticus, all right? I know probably you don't read from Leviticus every day. That's okay, but I want to read from this. This is what it says, Leviticus 20:24 through 26. This is God speaking. He says, "But I said to you, you will possess their land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey." Now, what God is saying to the Israelites at this point, now, remember, I've skipped back. Just be aware, I've skipped back thousands of years earlier, all right? God is saying to them, they've come out of the land of Egypt, they were slaves there, and what God is saying to them is, I am about to give you a land that is not your own. It was in these people's hands, and I am going to take it from them, and I am going to give it to you. Do you get it? I'm going to give it to you. And he says to them, I am the Lord your God who has set you apart from the nations. God is taking this land from this group of people, the Canaanites, and he is going to give it to the Israelites. And he's saying to them, I am the God, I'm the Lord your God who has set you apart from other nations. You are different, Israel. I was researching and reading kind of how Jewish people thought of themselves. And one of the ways rabbis interpret this was that Jewish people were just kind of the last ones God tried to choose. It's kind of a humble way of saying that we were the least of these, we were the worst of the worst, and we were just the last ones that God tried to choose, and we just happened to kind of be dumb enough to say yes to Him, right? This is how the Jewish people view themselves. But what God is saying to them is, I want to take you out, and I want to set you apart, and I want you to be different from every other nation. And here's how He's going to accomplish it. Verse 25 of Leviticus says this, you must therefore make a distinction between clean and unclean animals, and between unclean and clean birds. Do not defile yourself by any animal or bird or anything that moves along the ground. Those that I have set apart as unclean for you. You are to be holy to me, because I, the Lord, am holy. And I have set you apart from the nations to be my own. Now, if we were to jump back to Peter, and let me try to tie this together for you. When Peter says, I have never eaten anything impure or unclean, right? He is saying, in Garden City, where I'm from, they had a beef packing plant, and they literally would bring in a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, and he would have to inspect the way that they killed meat in order for it to be kosher, for it to be sold kosher for Jewish families to eat, right? This meant that it had to be killed a specific way. It had to have its little gruesome, its throat slit, and blood had to be drained out of it. They would remove the sciatic nerve out of it, and it had to be prepared in such a way that it was completely different from how the rest of the nations prepare their food and eat it. See, what God is trying to accomplish by creating dietary laws is He is trying to separate out His people. This is not about morality. This is not about them being better or worse. This is about God clean and unclean. I'm beginning to start interpreting that as separated from the other way that other people and other nations do things. You get that? God is trying to say to them, you are different. Imagine for a moment inviting a person of Hebrew descent to your house and trying to serve them some bacon, right? You offer them bacon and eggs, and it's, oh man, it's good. And they won't eat it because they will not eat a pig, right? They won't eat the bacon. I want you to imagine in cultures where everything is about honor. This is the kind of culture that they lived in, where everything is about honor. You think about Japan and how everything is about honor for the people of Japanese descent. If somebody said to them, I'm not eating that, it's unclean, right? It would create incredible separation between the two people, wouldn't it? Can you imagine somebody, you invite them over and you have them at your house and they won't eat your food because it's unclean? Right? It would be a little hurtful. God is using their diet. This is really genius to me. He's using their diet. He's using the thing that most of us gather around, Pizza Hut. Remember, gather around the good stuff. The thing that we gather around to have community around. He uses it to separate the Jewish people out. They're not allowed to eat the same things as you and I. This is what Peter is saying to God. God, I have never defiled myself. I have never eaten like the rest of the nations eat. I have always kept these religious ceremonial laws in my life. I've done it right, God. Why would you ask me? Peter is about About to give the voice a second time. Verse 15. The voice spoke to him a second time. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean, the voice says to him. Peter says, it's impure, it's unclean, I've never put that into my body. God says, do not call anything impure that God has made clean. This happened 3 times. And immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. Now, you have to know about Peter's life that this guy has several threes in his life, right? He denies Jesus 3 times. Jesus asks him if he loves him 3 times. And this time, 3 times. God brings down the picnic basket, right? He brings it down. And he says, eat. Peter's dying hungry. And he says, no, Lord. No, I've never eaten anything impure like that in my life. I am telling you, Peter is about to be shaken up by this. The scripture will even say, we're going to read it in a moment, but it'll essentially say that he just can't get it out of his head. I mean, it's just kind of rattling around. He can't shake it. He doesn't know what to do with it. I want you to hear for a moment. I want you to hear for a moment, from a religious perspective, that Peter has just walked up and into and up against God messing with his preference, his way of thinking about interacting with God. Have you ever had that happen to you? Have you ever come to church and everything's changed around and it's different? Right? I was thinking today we actually did something that for some of you was more comfortable, right? We sang hymns, and for some of you that was more comfortable. For some of you it was more uncomfortable because you've grown up and you're young and all you've known is not hymns, right? And so I was thinking about how for those people, this might have been weird for them to sing only hymns today, and because their preference was being trampled on, I bet some of you weren't singing today. Some of you, because your preferences were being kind of brought out and you were able to... And listen, let me say this real quick. I'm not saying one is good or bad. I'm just identifying that we all have a preference for music, right? And some of you today sang like you've never sang before, right? And that's good. It's not bad. But in both cases, we both are focused on our preference. And Peter is about to have his preference pushed in upon him. I was the pastor before this of a new church in Wichita. We started it from scratch. I've mentioned it several times, talked about it a little bit. But one of the funniest things to me, you would think in a new church that there would be no preferences. There would be no traditions because literally we had never been older than 5 years old at the time that I was there. So that's all we had was 5 years of history. We would do communion initially when we started. We would have these big buckets. They were popcorn buckets from a movie theater. And we would fill those up with army communions. Have you seen those where like you rip off the top and there's a piece of bread to take, you rip off the bottom and there's a juice? Have you seen those before? We'd fill those up because we didn't have enough volunteers to have somebody filling communion every week. This is how, I mean, when you start out, you just have nothing. So we filled that up, and we would put it out, and instead of passing it, because we didn't have volunteers enough to even have people passing the communion, we would have people come forward, get up on your seat, come forward and take the communion, and then you go sit back in your seat. Well, part of the process for that was having a trash can by the communion, all right? So get this picture, people walk up, they take the communion, and they throw their thing away in the trash. We finally get to the point as a church where we have enough volunteers to have communion made for them. Isn't that wonderful? They could come up, it's already made. We had bought the trays now. We don't have the big things anymore. We have the trays, and they can take it, and they can drink it. Just wonderful stuff. People come up, and they're taking it, and it's the first Sunday that we're doing it. I remember just being kind of excited and thrilled that we finally were at a place in our new church where we had enough people to do that. I had this lady come up to me after church, and she said this to me, Ken, where are the trash cans? I said, well, he said, they're right there. We had big trash cans, you know. She said, no, I mean the trash cans next to the communion. And I was like, well, we took them away. And she was like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? And she had her cup. And I said, you put it in the tray. That's what you do with it. She said, we have always had trash cans. We were 3 years old in the church at this time. We always had trash cans. And I said, no, we haven't. You don't even know. You only came a year ago, right? I mean, but you see how quickly inside of us traditions and again, please, I know this is a sensitive topic in church. I am not saying one tradition is better than the other. I'm not saying one preference is better than the other. That's why this morning, if you didn't sing on the hymns, maybe you need to question what your heart was about. Why are you even here, right? If you don't sing modern stuff. Maybe you need to question, who are you singing it for? Right? You see, I think Peter is walking up against one of these walls. And it is, I don't know that I can do justice how difficult this would be for him. His entire life, he has never eaten food like this. And God now is saying, just eat it, Peter. Right? He's saying, it's only unclean because I said it was unclean. And now I'm saying it's clean. Hello, God. Eat it. And 3 times Peter needs it. And even after 3 times, you get this, right? I get it. Even after 3 times, Peter still can't really digest it. And I think he would look at you and I, and he would say, you're uncomfortable with change? Me too. You're uncomfortable with the change? Me too, right? Do you get it? Please, please tell me that you identify with this. Old and young, this isn't just an old thing. This is about a person thing, a preference thing. Listen to what happens. Verse 17. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, I think it's funny that he had to wonder about it. It is pretty clear, right? Get up and eat. I made them clean. Eat. While he was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was. They stopped at the gate. They called out asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there, while Peter was still thinking about the vision. Right? Luke is telling us again, he can't get it out of his head while he's still thinking about the vision. The Spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. Now these men are likely Gentiles. I wish that I had time to take that sentence and kind of compare it to what God was saying before about getting up and going to eat, but he's using some of the same types of language, isn't he? Right? Simon, there are three men are looking for you, so get up, go downstairs, do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them, right? I think God is probably tying some things together for Peter. Peter went down and he said to the men, I'm the one you're looking for. Why have you come? The men replied, verse 22, we have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say. Then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests. Peter will go to Caesarea, and he will share with Cornelius' family the good news of Jesus. And the Holy Spirit will come on this Gentile man and his family, and Peter will identify it, and they will baptize them. And for the first times, is anybody in here Jewish? If you are, that's okay. I'm not trying to single you out. I mean, I just did single you out, but not for God. If you're not a Jew, you are a Gentile. So this moment in history should be one of the most important moments in history to you. Because God brought the gift of life through Jesus to the Gentiles in this moment by destroying Peter's preferences. That should walk all over me. That should walk all over you. I heard a pastor one time say that he said to somebody walking into his church, he said, well, I hope you enjoy it. And he said afterwards, I thought, I don't know if I really do. Because I say hard things up there all the time. Sometimes I literally walked the streets last night praying to God and kind of saying, I don't want to say this. Right? These are hard things to have to say. Sometimes we have to hear them. Because just like you, this is why I pointed out that I have all these preferences that get trampled on over and over again. And I have to deal with this. You and I have to deal with this. I wondered as I studied it and I thought about Peter bringing these people to Christ. I wondered about this. What would have happened if Peter had let his feelings of being uncomfortable keep him from accomplishing what God wanted him to accomplish? Where would you and I be? Look, God would have accomplished it, right? He would have brought the Gentiles to himself. He would have brought them to faith. But you know what would have happened with Peter? I think he probably would have missed out on getting to be a part of what God wanted to do. Not because God wanted to remove him from that, but because Peter was removing himself, right? I think that's probably, I've seen that over and over. It happen to people when they let their preferences keep them from doing what God wants them to do. I just want to tell you, this is from my own personal Christian experience. I probably could find scriptures to back it up because I'm a pastor, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try to baptize this one, right? I just want to tell you this. In my own Christian experience, following Jesus has been uncomfortable. He rarely calls me to easy things that are about being comfortable. And I think it's because He wants me to trust Him, not trust myself. Right? Tell me that isn't true for you. Actually, I can't think of a scripture. The path to hell is wide and easy. The path to the gates of heaven, it's narrow and difficult. Right? Jesus rarely calls us to easy things. I was talking with Jolene about this. She's our secretary in the office, and sometimes she gets my sermons before everybody else gets them because I have to test them on somebody. So I was talking to her, this is kind of a this was a difficult one. It really was. And I was talking to her, and I was thinking about it, and I just asked her this question. I said, what do you think are the best days of this church? And Jolene, I was so impressed with this answer. She said, I think they're ahead of us. Is that a cool answer? I was like, man, I wasn't expecting it. I was actually thinking, was it the 50s? Was it, I was kind of trying to figure out when. She said, I think they're ahead of us. And then she said this, because we've been talking about this whole idea of preference and how difficult it was, and I really care about you. Please hear me say, I care about you guys deeply. That's why this is a difficult sermon to preach. And I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. Please don't think that. This is just, I plan these sermons out well in advance. And I was thinking about it, and we were talking about preferences, and Jolene said this. I'm going to actually read it so I say it right. She said, my preference, I want my preference to be whatever reaches people. I want my preference to be whatever reaches people. I left after we talked about that, and I went back to my office. I was studying this passage some more, and I thought, man, I think that's what was different about the New Testament church, don't you? That their preference was about reaching people. Peter goes, he tells Cornelius this story, and when he's done telling Cornelius the story, he invites Cornelius into the family of God. Remember, the laws about not eating certain types of food were to keep people like Cornelius away from people like Peter. Jews and Gentiles do not associate. Separate yourselves out. And God is literally saying, no longer will it be dietary restrictions that keep people separate. What will separate you, remember what Jesus said, how people will know us? By our love, right? By our love. The whole way that we're separate from the world has changed. It's not about the religious ceremonial laws that we keep. It is about our love that changes us. And I think the New Testament church was able to embrace thousands of people coming to Christ. Incredible, tumultuous change happening in their midst. Do you know how I think that was happening? Because their preference, was about what God wanted to do. I just want to reach people. I had the privilege of sitting in a meeting. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it, but this week there was a meeting with, 10 or 15 of us maybe, and you know who you were if you were sitting in that meeting. And we were talking about ministry in this church and just asking some difficult questions, and it could have honestly been the kind of conversation in a church that could have gone real south. But what I found was that in our church, Jolene is not the only person who has this attitude. Because I heard people who, I know I said I'm old, but I think these people look at me and think I'm still in diapers, right? Because I'm not saying who you are, but there's some people in here who could look at me and say, you were only 37, you just started, buddy, right? And I heard these people saying things like, well, whatever it takes to reach people. You see, I hope you know, if you are new to this church, you are sitting amongst some of the very best people in Oswego. This is not something that is like foreign to our church. Please, this is not me just trying to pound everybody over the head. This is me just reminding us. And if you're new, I want to invite you to embrace this kind of attitude that says, I want my preference to be to reach people. This is what changed, I think, the New Testament church and propelled them into changing the world so that you and I could sit in this place 2,000 years later. Whew. Folks, I sat in that room with those 10 or 15 people. I literally left. Bill Cochran was there, all ratting him out. I literally left, and he and I talked, and I think I said, these are probably not my exact words, but I said, I was amazed by how I went. It was amazing. And you know what? It had nothing to do with what we talked about. It had everything to do with the hearts of the people in this church. Folks, I want to tell you, your preferences will get trampled in this life. It matters how we deal with them with our heart. If you sang today, or if you didn't sing today. If you don't normally sing because they're not your songs. That is a heart issue, not a melody issue. Do you get it? Because our God doesn't change. The songs will change. I guarantee you we are not singing the same songs. Even in your old hymn books, we're not singing the same songs that they sang 1,500 years ago. The songs change. Our God does not change. These things are heart issues for us. If you didn't sing today, can I ask you where your heart is? Why? God hasn't changed. If this pricks you, it should. Man, it should. I was walking the streets last night. I already said this. And I was praying, and I just was talking to God and saying, praying about this sermon. Wasn't feeling super great about that. Sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I need to go for a walk and just talk to God. And I was walking our streets. I was wearing flip-flops and socks. I am turning into an old man, I promise you. Wearing flip-flops and socks with the toe pushed in, I'm walking the streets and praying to God. And God just brought this thought across my mind. That last night, there was some girl in this town who was her first night to ever be abused by her dad. Not a super happy thought, but probably true. And I thought, this is why my preferences have got to be about whatever it takes to reach people. Because that girl needs Jesus. Her dad or whoever it is that's abusing her needs Jesus. Folks, we carry inside of us the most precious message in the world. Why in the world would I ever let, we've talked about this before, where I sit get in the way of that? Why would I ever let what I sing get in the way of that? Why would I ever let how the decor is or isn't get in the way of that? How would I ever let anything get in the way of seeing people find their way back home to God? We have an opportunity to do something really fantastic. There was a guy in World War II who was a Nazi, actually. You probably have heard of him. His name was Schindler, his last name. He had a factory in Nazi Germany. He actually made a lot of money off the war. He used his factory in the wartime efforts to just propel himself to be a wealthy man. Schindler was not a great guy. He drank a lot. He womanized. He wasn't like, please don't go out and be like, I want to be a Schindler, all right? Now, that part of his life wasn't super great, but Schindler had this factory, and mostly Jews were working in his factory. He had 1,200 of them. And Schindler began to take his money, and he would bribe Nazi officials to not take his Jews to the concentration camps for death. It was interesting. At first you might think it was because he wanted to make a lot of money and he didn't want to lose his workers. But Schindler ended up losing everything he had. He gave everything he had. Everything he had to see those Jewish folks saved. They became known as Schindler's Jews. Actually, after the war, he moved to a different country because Germans who were kind of nationalistic Germans who still were upset that they lost the war really persecuted Schindler. And he moved to a different country, and he tried to do business again, and he never could become successful again. And he ended up living off of funds that Schindler Jews gave to support him. Right? This was not for Schindler about making money. When he was asked one time why he did it, he said this. His answer was, I was a Nazi, and I believed that the Germans were doing wrong. When they started killing innocent people, and it didn't mean anything to me that they were Jewish. To me, it was just human beings mentioned, which means man. I decided I'm going to work against them. I'm going to save as many as I can. Folks, the difference, I think, between a church that thrives and a church that dies has a lot to do with when that church lets their preferences override what God is doing and how He is reaching and who He is reaching. Guess what? The next generation that God reaches in this place is not going to look like you and I. It might look a little bit more like me, just because it's so good looking. It's all right. Just kidding. They're not going to look like you and I. They're going to look different. And that's okay, right? Because when you really think about it, there is a world that's dying out there. How could I ever let whatever my preference is about how this is done, I'm not saying we get rid of things that are biblical, that are truth. I'm saying things that are just a preference. How could I ever let any of those override God's heart in reaching? He is going to do it. The question is whether He's going to do it with you and I or not, right? This morning I want to invite you to something a little difficult. In a moment, we're going to have a video that plays up here like we've done in the past. And I have simply put in your bulletin, there is a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper. You're welcome to tear that and give that to somebody. If somebody doesn't have a piece of paper, you can share that with your family. You don't need the whole thing probably. But I'm going to ask you to do something difficult. I'm going to ask you to think about, in church specifically, what are some things that you always know when your preferences are starting to be trampled on because you feel uncomfortable about it. You want to fight for those things, right? You want to kind of do something to make sure that those things get taken care of. What I'm asking you to do today is to just write a prayer to God about that. I'm not going to dictate what that needs to be, whatever you want to pray to God. But I'm going to ask you, during this video, to come up and drop those at the cross. Fold them up. And you take one of these with you. This says, my preference is to reach everyone, everywhere, whatever the cost. I'm willing to die to myself and my desires in order to reach those who are far from Jesus and help bring them home to God. I am inviting you with me to exchange our preferences in this world for all the things that we like. This is not easy, I hear you. All the things that we like, and say, this is what I want to love. I want to give up my preferences for yours, Jesus. And I think this is the difference. I've been thinking a lot lately, one of the things that I think makes me old is I'm getting really tired of young people criticizing church. Like the church is in the big church. Young people, you don't know, this is a big movement, and people kind of my age and younger, they criticize how Christianity's done. And I have begun to feel like, you've got to stop criticizing and have a broken heart, right? This is about having a broken heart before God. Saying, I give it up. I will do whatever it takes to reach the next generation, reach people. I give up my preferences for you. Now, He may not make me give them up. He's really good to us. But it's about us being willing. I guess my question is, are you willing to join me in that? Is the mission critical enough to you? I'm amazed that a womanizer was able to do that for some Jewish people that he didn't really know very well and didn't care about. Give up his money, his most treasured thing. Would you and I be willing to give up little things? This morning we're going to watch this video, and I dare you, I challenge you to get up and give it. This is a toughie. Let's watch the video. Defined not by our religious practices or preferences. We'll become people who are totally defined by our love, over and over again. And That takes every single day, every single minute commitment to Jesus. If you've never chosen Him, I would love to talk to you about that, because it's changed my life to know God Almighty. This morning, let's be the kind of people who love our community and make a difference. And pray for us, and then we will sing our closing song. Jesus, I thank you this morning. I thank you for the talent that is up on our stage right now and how they lead us into worship of you. And God, I thank you that we can sing songs that are 300 years old, 100 years old, 10 days old, and all of them point to you. It is the heart that matters, God. I pray that you'd help our hearts to be all about you, Jesus. I pray, God, that you would help any of us that feel trampled on this morning to turn to you and ask why we feel like it. God, help us to be humble. Help us to trust you. And God, I just pray for the people in this town who are desperate and dying and going to hell without you. I pray that you would help us to find those families, God, that are self-destructing and self-terrorizing. And God, the message, the good news of Jesus would implode what they've known as their life and change them into people who have hope, who have joy, who have peace, who bring life where they go instead of death. God, help us to care for the orphans in this world. Help us to care for the widows in this world. Help us to have a true religion of love in this place. I love what I've already seen, God. I'm just asking, I guess, for you to get your charge. It's in your name, Lord.
You guys think